That was really important to them. So their focus is very much on those relationships and having a good time in life.
Tanya, you're far too young to remember a film called The Passion According to St Matthew by Pasolini.
Unfortunately.
Okay, let me tell you about this. Malcolm Muggeridge, who's a very ardent old godbrother and now dead. Malcolm and I were discussing religious films on the Gospels, and we agreed that most of them are pretty terrible. You tend to have blue-eyed Jesus, and I remember one in which the star had shaven armpits for the crucifixion scene. Now, he agreed with me that the only really passionate, absolutely convincing film on Jesus was The Passion According to St Matthew. It was directed by Pasolini, who was gay, a communist and an atheist. And he used as actors village people from southern Italy. But it was a radical, left-wing, communist Jesus. And whenever I suggest that Jesus was probably a bit left-wing and wouldn't have gone along with the Republican Party, people get a bit cross. But your Year 8 science teacher had the same view, didn't he?
Absolutely, and it was something that made a lot of sense to me at the time. We weren't under the influences of prosperity theology at the time, and we were still actually a little bit frightened of the communists back in the 80s, I guess.
But you saw Jesus as someone who would connect with the poor.
Oh, it was
less is more.
Very socialist Jesus we were raised with.
And now there's, as you talk about a brand new Jesus wearing Gucci loafers where his sandals used to be.
That's right. It is interesting because the definitions of who Jesus is have changed multiple times over the centuries, and the one that we've got at the moment is a very popular contemporary figure in American culture.
It always amazes me. Sometimes I love looking at religious programs on television. I find them, anthropologically intriguing. And there's the one that's in the Crystal Cathedral in Los Angeles. Robert Schuller. And this is a church where the affluence bombards you. And I often wonder how you can bring this trick off. I know the major churches can combine great wealth with notions of poverty, but how is this idea of prosperity theology possible? How is it rationalised?
It's actually really simple, Philip. What you do is you tell people that every verse in the Bible is to be taken literally and can be applied to your own life. And then what you do is you show people, well, if you take these verses literally, these ones about money, and you interpret them like this, then you will find out that, God very much wants you to be rich.
Okay, so what do you think about this line, Philip? Is the preaching of prosperity not going against traditional religious messages that we should be humble?
Oh, I think that it does conflict with a lot of teaching, the traditions of teaching and so on, but there have been for a long time sort of undercurrents too, that if God loves you then and you are obedient to God, then God will bless you, and part of that blessing may be in health terms and it may be in material terms. But that certainly hasn't been the sort of dominant teaching of the churches. And I also feel that there's still a lot of debate going on about it within the Pentecostal movement.
I was always appalled by the more outrageous American televangelists, and that, of course, is a tradition that predates telly. It goes back to Amy Semple McPherson and the Holy Rollers and the tent shows. Yeah. Goes back a hell of a long time. But there was always money as a central issue, and of course, churches are not required to pay tax. Even the Scientologists can rebirth themselves as a religion, as a church, and benefit from this. To what extent do you think Australian Pentecostal churches are in it for the money, as opposed, I'm talking about their leaders, as opposed to being absolutely genuine?
Well, that's a $64,000 question, isn't it? I mean, what is their intent? It's very, very difficult. From the people that I've spoken to who are close to the leaders at the top, a lot of them will argue that because these people spend so much time travelling and are so insular, they don't actually have an awareness of what's going on around them or the impact that they have. It's just show to show to show to show.
Show to show. It's an interesting choice of words. But I suppose they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. You can imagine, you could conceive of an energetic Pentecostal minister who was really passionate about his faith, but equally passionate about money. There are people in Italy, for example, who were members of the Catholic Church and the Communist Party.
Yeah, I mean, sure, why not? I think all of the mainstream churches are entitled to the tax-free provisions that, you know, the Pentecostal churches have as a you know, what's seen as highlighted for the Pentecostals. It's just none of these churches are as explicit in, you know, trying to solicit funds from the congregation.
Philip, to be fair, of course, the mainstream churches have always been pretty good at amassing fortunes, and I recall the tension in Melbourne when the Uniting Church was being structured, and the Melbourne Presbyterians didn't want to be in it because they were preposterously well off in terms of major real estate.
Yes, I mean, that's true. On the other hand, that money generally has been in real estate rather than in actual cash flow, and it certainly hasn't been a mark of their leaders that, as most of the churches, that they've been wealthy.
And of course, the professionals, the professional religious within the churches live on the smell of an oily rag. I know this because I was raised in a manse.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
What about the churn rate, Philip? Does your research show to what extent people drop in and out of Pentecostal churches?
There were some figures that were developed a few years ago now, but which indicated that the flow-through was about 50% in 5 years. So that's taking into account all the people coming in and the people going out. So there is a fair amount of churn through.
Tanya, you observe that the average membership of a typical church that you know is around 2 years.
Yeah, the figures pretty much line up with what Dr. Hughes is saying. There's a very big backdoor in Hillsong. It just doesn't get seen.
Where do they go?
A lot of people become disillusioned with that form of Christianity and will go back to a more traditional form of Christianity. Some people go on, you know, to become fervent atheists.
I think I could cop the vulgarity, which is what it seems to me, of many of Pentecostal service, and I could even turn a blind eye to the accrual of money if there wasn't almost the inevitable connection between the Pentecostal movement and political conservatism. Now, in the United States, the Christian church was a vital progressive force in, say, the civil rights movement. The courage of Christians working with secular Jews and others in breaking down America's version of apartheid was very impressive. But these days, of course, when you think of the Pentecostal movement, you think of George W. Bush.
Absolutely.
Is that the same here? I know they're not pushing Bush, but is there an inevitable connection between the Pentecostal movement in Australia and conservative politics?
I believe there is. The politics that we see espoused from the pulpit are very conservative, and they fall into line with conservative political parties. There's no reason to believe that the Australians would underestimate their own influence politically either.